Okay. And I will formally start by introducing you to these two fantastic authors. Welcome to this event with Madeline Martin as she discusses her new book, The Book Lover's Library. Madeline Martin is a New York Times, USA Today, Publishers Weekly, and internationally best-selling author of historical fiction and historical romance, with books that have been translated into over 25 different languages. Many of them are book and bookstore centric, as I mentioned. I think we need a new genre called bibliophile catnip for books like Madeline's.
Definitely
Um,
support that.
yeah, I mean, for booksellers and book lovers anywhere alike, books about libraries and bookstores are just mwah. So, Madeline lives in sunny California with her, or I'm sorry, Florida,
Other
other
coast.
side. We'd love to have you in California, but in Florida with her two daughters, the Minions, two incredibly spoiled cats, as they should be, and a man so wonderful he's been dubbed Mr. Awesome. She is a die-hard history lover who will happily lose herself in research any day. When she's not writing, researching, or momming, you can find her spending time with her family at Disney or sneaking a couple of spoonfuls of Nutella while laughing over cat videos. She also loves to travel, attributing her fascination with history to having spent most of her childhood as an army brat in Germany. We also welcome her in conversation partner, Rachel McMillan, one of Warwick's great partners in virtual events. Rachel McMillan is an author and literary agent in Toronto, Ontario. And her next book, The Liberty Scarf, releases from Harper Muse on November 19th. And I'll put that link in the chat as well. Before I leave the screen, for those watching here, do remember to use either the chat or the Q&A option on the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask questions, and we'll bring those in at the end of the conversation between Rachel and Madeline. So with that, let's go. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for those great
Thanks very much.
introductions. And thank you so much, Rachel, for being here
Oh,
too.
you're so
It
welcome.
was
Hi, Madeline.
so hi. We got to meet each other in person in
In real life.
Toronto in
Yeah.
April, and it was as amazing as I think we thought it was going to be.
And I hopefully like Madeline's coming back to Canada, everybody, this fall. So hopefully we're gonna get the band back together again. And we actually were hanging out with our mutual friend Bryn Turnbull, who I've interviewed on for Warwick's before, who also lives in Toronto. There's a lot of great Toronto authors. And it's so fun to have you, Madeline. And I just am obsessed with Madeline. I think she's
Oh.
amazing. She's such a good writer. She has the cutest cats. And she also has, I mean, we can all say you have single-handedly pioneered or ushered in a brand new subgenre of historical fiction with The Last Bookshop in London, which marries people's fascination with World War II, with these wonderful historical periods, but books about books, especially as weapons in The Librarian Spy and The Keeper of Hidden Books, books as a love letter to resilience, like The Last Bookshop in London. Madeline and I both had Blitz-centered books come out around the same time. And ours were set in very mine was London Restoration is all about the beautiful Christopher Wren churches, and so the alleys around St. Paul's functioned for me telling that story, whereas the Blitz in Last Bookshop in London talked about that arena of London as well. We're both London lovers, which I love. And now we have the Book Lovers Library, which is another tale of resilience and romance. And you have written so many historical romances before. What inspired you to move into the historical fiction arena?
So, yeah, I had written over 35 romances before I wrote my first historical fiction. And, I think that like when I look back at falling in love with books myself, my first books that I fell in love with were the series by Laura Ingalls Wilder, starting with The Little House in the Big Woods. And I think I just really became enamored with history, historical fiction specifically from that point on. That sort of transportation into a completely different world that had once existed but no longer does. And I mean, I tell you, like I became obsessed with Laura Ingalls Wilder. I had a
You're not
calico
the only one. I
dress.
know so many friends.
Oh my gosh, I had like a calico print dress. I had like a bonnet. And I will also tell you that the log cabin maple syrup does not freeze like real maple syrup does in the books. And if you put it in the freezer to try, your mom will be very upset with you. I learned that lesson the hard way
You
as a
tried
little.
it out. I love that.
So yeah, so I really have enjoyed history so much. And also I think even growing up in Germany and really getting to explore so much of Europe and having access to these amazing old sites and these wonderful tour guides who are presenting this history in such a fashion that they're just, you can tell they're passionate about it. And like, how can you not let that passion seep into your heart, you know? And so I think that that's one of the reasons why I've loved history so much. And so I enjoyed writing historical romance, and historical fiction was something I always kind of wanted to tackle, but it seemed very difficult. And I mean, and it is very, very difficult. And even writing historical romance is very difficult.
Mhm.
But with romance, you know, the primary, like the most important aspect of the book is going to be the romance, the relationship between the man and the woman, and them becoming whole together. But with a historical fiction, I would hazard to say that the historical accuracy and historical research is even more important than the protagonist. And so that requires a significant amount of work to put into to ensure that it's as accurate as possible. So I usually do like about 10 months worth of research to try to make sure that I have this. And you know, when I first started out, I was like, gosh, I don't know if I can do this. It's kind of daunting because I didn't know how deep I was going to be able to do with the research myself. So I ended up being laid off from my job that I'd been with for 16 years. I was a business analyst when I like to joke that I was writing full time, working full time, and momming full time. And because I was writing like 6 to 8 books a year while writing my full time job, and my kids come first, regardless of what
Yeah.
else is going on in my life, including my work and my writing. And so I ended up, I kind of saw the writing on the wall that everyone was getting laid off. And I told my husband, well, if I get laid off, do you think that maybe I could just write full time because I'm tired? And he was like, yeah, he absolutely supported it. And so I ended up getting laid off, which is like, it's horrible to say. I'm very excited, but I was really so ready to do it. And, you know, I got to have that sort of runway of having a severance package, which was like godsend for me at that time. And so I thought, you know, this is going to be amazing. I can write my historical fiction. I can be home completely by myself after over 10 years of writing, most of that in the living room, and really getting to have my own private space to write. Well, that was February 2020. And the pandemic happened like 3 weeks later, and I got robbed. But it did have the opportunity. I still had that ability to start writing The Last Bookshop in London and really delving into the research for that book. And then I discovered in writing that book that I thoroughly enjoyed the research aspect of it. In fact, I think if I never had a deadline, I would probably research a book for like 25 years
Oh,
and
I would
probably
never,
never.
ever. I never know when to stop. I'm still researching in line edits. I'm still researching in galleys. I'm still like, what else
Yep.
can I flavor into
And our
this? Yeah.
editors hate us for it because we'll be like, okay, I
Oh,
know I'm only supposed to change like 1 or 2 words, but can we add this paragraph in because it's so cool?
yeah. No, and it's really neat because it does take a different, as you say, there's something about romance where the be all, the end game is the two getting together. With historical fiction, you still have romance in your books, but you have to have a very different mindset when you're approaching how the pacing and the structure of the novel is going to happen. Now, that being said, yes, you are a prolific and popular historical romance novelist, but I know that you bring the exact same mindset and approach to this genre because you're also an impeccable researcher in the other genre. But one of the comments here said that, as my daughter would say, I have all the feels. That's Susan Siegelman saying, love the historical fiction novels, Madeline. Book Lovers Library has all the feels. And I wanted to bring that out. And I'm
Aw, thank
happy that
you.
you introduced this, Susan, because it segs into the fact that I actually think that this one reads a little bit more romantic than some of the other ones. And can you tell us about your adorable hero? And if there's any like real life counterparts that informed a bit of the hero and how you approached the romantic aspect of Book Lovers Library.
Right. Well, maybe. So I will say, so, actually writing the Book Lovers Library was probably the most personal book that I've ever written. And that really comes down to my own experience as a single mom. Basically with the Book Lovers Library, it's about, it's a heartwarming home front read setting Nottingham, England, right at the cusp of the beginning of World War II, where a widowed mother has to send her daughter away during the evacuation of children in England. So I knew that was going to be kind of heavy. And so I found this wonderful place called the Book Lovers Library, which we'll get into later
Yeah.
on.
Oh, I've got a whole Boots question around that.
But it's this lovely place that actually existed that I thought would be really lovely and light to sort of add for her to work there. But with this book, I really wanted to explore the mother. I wanted to explore sort of what her thought process would be in going through trying to have to send her child away during this evacuation. And also, I wanted to also kind of, I guess, in a cathartic sense, explore that aspect of my life where I was a single mother for a few years on my own. And, my ex-husband got the girls every other weekend, which parents all know every other weekend ain't much. And with no family in the area, it really was just myself and the two girls. And so now we do have, it's four of us now. I am now remarried, and my husband and I have been together for, gosh, I think it's been about 12 or 13 years. We're getting ready to celebrate our 3-year anniversary. And, I didn't even realize that I was writing Mr. Fisk really as my husband, as John. But once I realized at the very end of the book, I was like, oh my gosh, I wrote John and sort of what he's brought into our lives and what he's done, with our family. And that just made it even more special.
I love that. And it is a romantic story. And as you said, you're known for the meticulous research, but you balance it so well with these very character-driven stories. And one of the things that I envy is a mean word. One of the things that I try to be more like you in is that in my historical writing, I get tangled in the weeds and I just stay in the weeds. And then our poor readers are like, why are we still
I don't agree.
describing
I
this?
think your writing is lovely. I think you do a great job
let's
balancing.
let's move this on, Rachel. And I did wonder, Nottingham is obviously not necessarily a location focused on in current historical fiction, unless you're telling a Robin Hood retelling. But it is a lovely, lovely area. And how did you stumble on that location? Were you doing research for another book and it popped up, or how did that all come about?
So I actually, the way it sort of happened was I found out about the Book Lovers Library, which, and should I just go ahead and delve into the
Just
Book
go
Lovers
ahead, yeah,
Library?
because
We're kind of on that thread.
we're on the thread. Yes.
All
And
right,
we
I'm
all
holding
love
on it.
boots. Go into the
So
Book Lovers Library.
yes. So Boots Book Lovers Library, Boots pharmacies or chemists are all over England, just like a Walgreens or a CVS is here. And they had these wonderful places called the Book Lovers Library within them, which were lending libraries. And this was sort of at a time where, in the early 1900s, library books were predominantly going to be based on more research, and they didn't have the sort of novels available like they do today. And really, I feel like novels kind of had like this huge like come out in the 20s and 30s and 40s, where you had all of these romances and all of these mystery authors and everything. They were really very prolific. And like, for example, Agatha Christie had her first book, I think, releasing in the 30s, which The Mysterious Affair at Styles is such a good read. If you haven't had a chance, I highly recommend it. So people could essentially, because they couldn't afford to go out and buy all of these books, but you could do a lending library, which for the cost of a paperback book, you could have a membership to a lending library. You had your Class A subscribers who paid a little bit more and expected a lot more. And you had your Class B subscribers who had to wait about a year until the book had come out to be able to rent their book there. But and it's actually really funny too, because back, nowadays, if your book ends up in Costco, like it's a big deal. And back in the day, if your book got picked up by the Book Lovers Library, it was a very big deal. And I thought that was kind of cool. But so with the Book Lovers Library, if you would almost kind of imagine like a Walgreens or a CVS, if you
Yeah.
walked in and you went all the way to the very back of the store or to the second floor, depending on where it was located, and you were magically transported into this bookish paradise with thick pile carpets and fresh cut flowers, stained glass windows, and just shelves and shelves of books. And that's exactly what the Book Lovers Library was. So I found this article about the Book Lovers Library, and I started to sort of do some research because I thought, oh, well, this place sounds lovely. And also, what a great title, which obviously I borrowed for my book.
Yeah.
And and I found out that the women who worked there, so this happened, this book takes place during the marriage bar, when the marriage bar was still in place, meaning that when women got married, they had to give up their jobs to become full-time wives and mothers. And apparently, the women who worked for the Book Lovers Library had statistically longer engagements than women in other areas of employment because they loved their job so much they didn't
Love
want to
it.
give it up. And I thought, oh, I absolutely love that. And so I started to research more and more and more. And I started to find all of these actual patrons who used to frequent the Book Lovers Library. And they were such quirky, odd, like, there's so many crazy stories. I thought, oh, this would be really lovely to sort of inspire some of my actual characters in this book based off of these real people who went into the Book Lovers Library. So some of the people, if you're reading the Book Lovers Library or you're going to, and you love these characters, they're actually based off of real people. Little bits and pieces
That's
here and there.
so fun. And I just want to interject. I don't know if there's any classic movie buffs here, but if you watch the film, the David Lean film, Brief Encounter with Trevor Howard and Celia Johnson, she goes into a Boots book section and rents out her book on one of her days in town. So if you're watching Brief Encounter and want like to cry your eyes out because that movie is so sad, you can see that because I immediately thought of that scene when I first read this book. I was like, that's what it looks like. So you researched these book lovers libraries and you clearly found one in Nottingham. Why that one?
Yes, that's right. That's where I was going with this. Thank you for
No,
directing.
it's so much fun though. Like there's so much
There's so
to
much,
this
there's so much
story
to
and
talk
narrative
about.
history. Yeah.
And especially with doing so much research, it's easy to sort of get like overwhelmed with like things to talk about because there's so much that I can't be like exactly put this in the book. You know what I mean?
I
So,
know.
so with Nottingham, Nottingham had two main stores there, and the first was the very first Boots pharmacy to ever exist. And the second was not the first Boots pharmacy, but it was the first one that housed the first Book Lovers Library. And so I thought, okay, you know what? I feel like, there are a lot of books that are set in London, and I had already set a book in London previously. And I thought, first of all, I don't want to go back to London. I kind of wanted to explore something a little bit different. And when I found out that these Boots Book Lovers Library, that the Boots store and the Book Lovers Library both really originated in Nottingham, I thought, okay, this sounds really interesting. So I knew that I wanted to go there so that I could see the store, which unfortunately now is a Zara. And so the inside is
Of
like
course it
glossy
is.
white walls and halogen lights. And there's like no soul. Like it's so sad. But the outside is still this beautiful scrolling stonework with these gorgeous stained glass windows. And there's still this clock like on the corner of it. And I took a million pictures. So it's still absolutely lovely. But one of the things that kind of sealed it for me with Nottingham was apparently they used to have well, they still do have caves that run all under
Mhm.
the city. And they used that to shelter in during the Blitz, which I thought was really incredible because I've never heard of anywhere else in England that had caves that they would shelter in. And I thought, okay, well, I have to go there. I have to see this. And then they also, they had a bunch of factories that were also really implementing items for the war effort. One of which was they had a bicycle making factory where they actually made these folding bicycles that people would fly into. They would strap them on their backs when they were
Love it.
parachuting out of the plane. And when they got there was a little pin. They would unfold it, put the pin in, hop on the bike, and go. And it gave them the opportunity to really cover a lot more distance when they landed rather than having to be on foot, which gave them more of an opportunity to be able to not get caught. And so they actually made these folding bicycles in Nottingham. And so getting to go on site was a really amazing experience. In fact, there is actually still a lending library there, which was pretty cool because lending libraries pretty much fell out of existence in the 70s. And it's called Bromley House, and they were so kind as to let me come in. They gave me a tour. They let me stay there and work for the entire day for free, which was very kind of them. And it was just beautiful. There were so many different rooms. You could completely get lost. And they had this big spiral staircase in the very middle of the main room. And apparently it's like 200 years old, but it's a walk at your own risk because it moves. And
Oh my
I
gosh.
didn't go on it because I did not want to be that American. That
No,
we
don't be that American.
like American breaks 200-year-old. Like,
And
no,
then you're
that is
all
not going to be
over.
me.
But one thing to say to anybody watching is Madeline is very kind and generous in sharing all of these photos from her research trips. And if you follow her on Instagram or on Facebook or go to her website, you are going to be able to see some of these things that she's describing. So definitely follow her and
Thank you.
continue. So you there was a staircase. You got to go. Lending Library, Nottingham's an amazing place. The caves are especially cool. I loved that. And yes, it
Yeah.
was really fascinating to get out of. I mean, we both love London. London is one of my muse cities, and I know it's one of yours. But there was
Yes.
just such a flavor of, yes, we're still reading a World War II set novel, which your last few have been, but they've been in such amazing arenas that are outside on a different kind of war front. And so anyone who turns away from historical fiction set during the war because it's so depressing, and yes, it is a very stark time for sure, you're focused more on the humanity and the relationships and the love of literature that binds people. And I think that that's just absolutely amazing. And it's, you kind of preempted one of my questions about research, because one of the things we also share is that I'm just going to answer you, Joan Stein, that the ones she set in World War II, Last Bookshop in London, Booklover's Library, Librarian Spy, they are not romances. They're historical fiction with sometimes a romantic element. She also writes traditional historical romances that you can easily find on the web. So Madeline, we both love traveling for research. And one of the things that I do when I'm in a city, when I'm, researching, I'm there for research, I've got my phone out and I'm taking pictures, but I also do a lot of my descriptive writing on site. So what I do is I'll put my camera away and I'll just describe everything longhand so that I can see and then transfer that into a manuscript afterward, because then I feel the reader's getting the panoramic view that I
Yeah.
am seeing it. How do you approach research trips? I mean, you obviously have binders full that are color coordinated and so organized. By the time you get over to, say, France or to Nottingham, wherever you, Poland, wherever you are for a book, how do you approach the research when you're on a trip?
So that's a great question. And I also have to say, I wish that my handwriting was neat enough to do what you do with the hand, because I would totally go back and look at it later and be like, does that say rabbit? That can't be. Um, so, I do probably about 3 months of really hardcore research before I even start planning my trip. And then I've started doing personal private tour guides because nobody wants me in their tour group, because it'd be like, does anybody have any questions? I'd be like, oh,
Yeah.
number one. So I have learned that it's best to just hire my own private tour guide. And I usually will reach out and say, this is the information I have. These are sort of the pockets of information that have been sort of lacking in my research that I would love to get more information on. Can you help me? And I've had people who have reached out and said, replied back and said, you know more about my country in World War II than I do. You might want to find somebody else. And then I've had other people that have said, I can answer some of that. The other part I can't, but I'm really excited about looking it up and finding it out for you. And so obviously those are the people that I end up going with. So when I'm on a trip, I make sure I book everything in advance. I pretty much have an itinerary for what I'm going to do, with a little bit of room for flexibility while I'm there. But I don't like to use public transportation unless I absolutely have to. I try to walk everywhere that I possibly
Yeah.
can. So I usually end up walking about 25,000 steps a day, because I want to really cement in my mind the path that my character is taking and really get a feel for what all of
And
that
how long it takes. And
yes.
what, now this is the interesting thing about Britain is so many of the streets and so many of the bombs changed things. Was that
Right.
the case in Nottingham in the same way it is in London? Did you have
It really
to?
wasn't. The city was still pretty much the same. And it's interesting because even when I was doing research for The Keeper of Hidden Books, which was set in Warsaw, Poland, and I was there for
Mhm.
2 weeks. So Warsaw, Poland was like 85% destroyed by
Oh
the
yeah.
from September 1929 39 during the original bombing all the way through when the Nazis left at the very end and literally drilled holes into buildings, inserted dynamite, and blew them up on their way out. The entire city, like I said, 85% completely destroyed. And they rebuilt the city using chunks of rubble. Also, when you go and you look at the city now, you might see a building that has a couple of chunks that have these sort of dark pieces of stone embedded with bullet holes still and then new built around it. And it was almost like this citywide puzzle that they pieced back together again, which was incredible. Now, Poland was under Soviet control at that particular time. And so some streets did not remain the same. Soviets wanted to have wider streets so they could have a lot of their parades and that kind of thing. So some things were altered. But for the most part, a lot of it is pretty similar to how it was back then. But I do actually have a map from Warsaw from like 1938 that I was able to use to make sure that there weren't any discrepancies. So I am that pedantic
Oh,
research nerd.
I do the same thing. I cross reference. I have Blitz maps. I have got all that thing. Vienna is another one that I need to know in the war. So I do that. But I will say there's always this one guy who's like, you were 6 weeks off.
Yes, I'm telling you, if we did spend 25 years to write a book, there would always be that one
There'll
guy.
be one guy. It's always going to be one
Actually,
guy. And it's really fascinating. And I want everybody in the chats to be thinking about your questions because uh Madeline, in all of her glory, preempted like 17 of my own questions, which is that's just the best part of this. I mean, you already discussed the caves and how fascinating it was, how amazing it was to go into this world. So I think that, we've got a sense of your books that have books as a motif. And I know that you are going to be going in some new directions. It was so fun. Everybody, Madeline has a book out in, not the next one is the Victorian one, but after that. And our friend Bryn and I and Madeline sat at a little wine bar in Toronto, and we got the server to bring us little pieces of paper, and we worked through some of this book, and it's really exciting. And so I want to reassure readers that her upcoming books will still have nods to books because it's Madeline. But it's also really exciting because you've worked so much within the parameter of the war years that you're getting to stretch a little bit. The next one is the something affairist. Where is it? I
the
saw it here
Secret Book
earlier.
Society.
Yes,
Yeah.
a Secret Book Society. I keep calling it that Victorian book because I'm a Victorianist. That was my university degree, and I'm so excited because Victorian era books have not, we know this from the publishing industry, Madeline and I know this, it wasn't always a period that book publishers were snapping up. So did your approach to research change? Were you able to repurpose research from maybe a historical romance? How did you approach this new time period since you've been in the 20th century for a bit?
Oh, it was all new and it was all so thrilling because of it. Like
Yeah.
with working with World War II, every time I go into a new country, it's like I get to learn an entirely new aspect of the war. But I have researched World War II for the last 4 books and getting to switch genres and not genres, but getting to switch historical time periods
Yeah.
and find a new time period to really delve into. It's almost like rediscovering a new holiday that you get to enjoy all these fun little traditions. And it's like, what's this? Oh, and what's that? Oh, and
Oh,
this is
and
so
it's
neat.
my
Let me research this.
favorite
So
period. It really
the
is.
discovery stage was like me, seriously, a kid in a candy store, just gobbling up every little piece of information that I could. So the Book Lovers, I'm sorry, the Book Lovers Library, the Secret Book Society is basically about a young countess who has been widowed 3 times, and yes, there is certainly some scandal and rumors surrounding that. And she
Love it.
discovers that women are having their reading materials suppressed by their husbands. And so she invites them into her home and she opens her very extensive library to them. But they don't just discuss gossip or books at those meetings. There are some more subversive topics. But I can't get into all of that just yet.
No,
But
you
I
want
will say that
to.
as of September 2025, you are cordially invited to the Secret Book Society.
Yay! No, that's fantastic. And the Victorian period is a favorite. We have a mutual friend, Mimi Matthews, who does Victorian so well
Yes.
for Romance Sphere. She
I
is
actually reached out to her a couple of times to confirm
because she's an
some of my research. Yeah, so
exceptional
Mimi
researcher.
Matthews, if you are a Victorian lover, if you're a lover of all things Victorian, Mimi Matthews, and she writes romance, but it's clean romance, and it's so good. I just finished The Rules for Ruin, and oh, it comes out soon. It's so good.
My favorite of hers is A Modest Independence, and it's very feminist, and it's a woman who wants to live on her own despite the restrictions of the Victorian era, and the hero is Rachel Catnip, which is always my favorite. And yeah, it's amazing that the writing community, we can rely on people for research, especially because so many of us have been in the post-war and World War II era for a very long time. Um, Actually, November Liberty Scarf, that one's set in World War One. And oh gosh, it was so much fun to get out of World War II for a bit. I mean, you
Yeah.
you know, we go where
Oh,
the
yeah.
ideas are and the contracts are, but
But I
it's
think
it's very
as we're talking about Liberty Scarf, I think you should tell us a little bit more about it. And I know it comes out in November. What day in November does it come out?
November 19th, and it's with
Okay.
Amy Sazelsky. No, turn brain on, Rachel. Remember, it's almost 8 o'clock here. I've had a long day. Amy Runyon and Janelle Sazelsky and I, we released a book last year with Harper Muse called The Castle Keepers. And that one was about 3 different generations in the same castle. In Liberty Scarf, it's all women in World War One, the last days of World War One, who are bound together by a scarf from Liberty of London, the beautiful department store there. And my portion of the story delves into the Belgian forces in World War One had musicians that would travel with the soldiers to boost morale, and they would set up tents, and they would, classical musicians. They picked the best musicians that were on offer, and I always try to throw in some classical music to anything I write. And so it's a nurse, and he's a cobbler turned violinist, and it's really fun, and you get to see our very different personalities. If anyone wants to go back to last week's Warwick's event, it was Amy Runyon and our friend Kate Quinn, because Amy's book Mademoiselle Eiffel just came out. The daughter of what's his name?
Mr.
Gustav Eiffel, who did Mr. Eiffel, who built the Eiffel Tower.
Monsieur.
Yeah, Monsieur. So yeah, that's the next one. And then I've got another book coming, another historical fiction just on my own, but it doesn't have a finalized date because it hasn't had a finalized copy. It's needed lots of edits, which sometimes books do. It's been a process. So that's what I've been working on. Operation Scarlet. And it's
Ooh.
my Scarlet Pimpernel retelling in occupied France and
Ooh.
Paris and Rouen. And I love Rouen so much. So that one's just taken a little bit more time, but it's romantic and it's a little bit swashbuckling. And I kind of wanted to exercise my love for the Pimpernel story in some way. So, oh, Warwick's even, brilliant. They even put in the YouTube for Amy's discussion last week, which is
You
also
guys are awesome.
So that's what's going on in my life. Does anyone have any questions for Madeline so that I don't keep rambling at all of you? And there's Amanda. Hello, with your awesome glasses.
Thanks. We have a couple in the Q&A. Are you able to see them, or would you rather I read them out? Shall I just read them out? Here, I'll do that. Oh, well, first off, back in the chat, actually, someone asked and this is a very basic but could be a very complex question and answer. Are these books romances? Madeline's books? Like
So,
this book specifically, I think.
yeah, so well, this book and all of my historical fiction, The Last Bookshop in London, The Librarian Spy, The Keeper of Hidden Books, and The Book Lover's Library, are not romance. They are historical fiction. there are some underlying romantic elements to it because I feel like love is just a part of everybody's life, whether you have it or don't have it, or wish
Yeah.
you had it, or whatever the case may be. But the romance is not an enormous part of the plot. It's historical fiction. Yeah. Mhm.
And that was Joan's question. Um, Adriana asked, I'm curious about Madeline's research, in particular for her historical fiction, how she organizes it, if she prefers books or electronic research. How do you keep things in order? Rachel did mention your binders, but maybe we could hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I wish that I was able to keep them all as organized as I should, but I don't always. So I love to have the actual books to use because I'm that person that's like, oh, it was that book with the red cover and it was like halfway through and it was that one page with the long paragraph towards the bottom. Oh, there it is. And it has all the information that I'm looking for. And if I borrow a book, then I can't go back to that. So I buy all of my books and I keep them all. My husband actually built a library for me in the living
Oh
room this last
yeah.
year. And it
It's a
was really,
pretty
he's so sweet. And it's really cute because after he built it, he said, do you think you'll be able to fill it?
give
So
me
I need another
four
one.
minutes.
But so I keep all of my research there. It's all organized by time period and by location. And for whatever reason, with the Keeper of Hidden Books, I happen to keep track of how many I used. And I had over 100 nonfiction books that I used when I wrote that book.
Wow.
And I ended up having over 15 spiral bound notebooks that were completely filled with handwritten notes. And it's funny because somebody asked me once how much of that actually makes it into the story, and I realized like maybe 30%.
Yeah.
But that other 70% is what makes it completely come to life in my head. And so I am totally old school. I do handwrite. But I will say I have to very carefully handwrite because, like I said, I've got some chicken scratch writing. Otherwise, I won't be able to read it. But it's like when I type it on a computer, I don't remember it. But for whatever reason, when I handwrite it, I do. And so, and whenever I'm filling out my books in the very back, I always have, and of course it ends up being, they get mixed up because I'll think, oh, I'm going to use this book for just this one thing. And then I find a research with just that one thing. And I'm like, where did I put the notebook? And then I'm like, oh, let me just write it down in this one. And then it ends up getting all messed up. But I always keep the back open for, because I read through so many firsthand accounts. I try to keep the back open for vocabulary words that were used back then, for specific locations that are mentioned in firsthand accounts, especially if they have a street location and the name of a store, or just it's just really pertinent period specific things like that. How about you, Rachel?
I think I'm very much longhand. I love the tangible aspect. And I read a ton. I'm also very lucky to be able to live in a city like Toronto where we have a fascinating amount of archives and the reference library here has things from all over the world. That's where I find my maps of cities, not Toronto or not in Canada. But I call them my Bibles, and then I'll highlight. And as I'm working through the book, I do use Scrivener. So I'd go and double check and then put the pertinent research for that moment within. But I'm the same way. I will research like 17,000 times more than ends up in the book. And I have one moment where this actually worked in my favor. I'm currently writing a nonfiction biography of Sir Christopher Wren, the architect. And that came about because an acquiring editor from the publishing house in the UK read the London restoration and thought, this girl is such a geek and we need a new Wren biography. Like, hey, maybe she can do it. So an accessible,
Best compliment ever.
new one. So I was able to take all the research that my editor was like, no, no one wants to read this. This is too much. And now I'm repurposing it for something else. So writers, always keep your research at hand because you never know when it's going to turn up. And I think, Madeline, you'd say the same thing.
Oh,
I've done a few books set in World War II. I don't feel it's the same as when I'm writing Edwardian, whatever era I'm writing. I don't feel then that I'm always starting from scratch because I have a mosaic and I have a starting point and I speak the language of the era. I
right.
know the idioms, even through different countries, there's a seminal sensibility to the era that you keep using. And so I would say we don't feel like we have to start all the way at the beginning every time we we do this.
Absolutely. And it is nice having the plethora of research to really be able to mine if you have a new idea instead of, because,
Yeah.
when you have a proposal, you don't get to just write that book. So, and you don't get paid unless you get the proposal accepted. So you don't want to go and start a brand new book and buy like 50 books
Yeah.
and then not be able to use them all. Or, whatever. But if I already have a lot of those books, like for example, when I wrote the Book Lovers Library, I had a huge amount of books from London about England during the war that I was able to go into and start doing research. And I found a lot of research available in those books that I had that I used for the last bookshop in London that I was able to use again for the Book Lovers Library, without having to really go through the expense of purchasing those
Yeah.
before I got paid, which is always nice.
Like a wine cellar for books.
Exactly, exactly. A
You'll
literary
open
wine
it when you
cellar.
need it.
Exactly. And of course, they're all old. Like that's one of the best things about all these books is that so many, well, it's wonderful because they all smell amazing, but it's sad because so many of them are out of print now. But I have like so many of these books that are like you open it up and they're just yellowed with age. And of course, the first thing I do is like I have to smell it.
And then I check for little notes and
So good.
little like receipts and things that people left
Yes.
and ticket
Yes.
stubs and all of that.
Yeah, I'm like a shameless book sniffer, especially the older the book, the more the sniff. Sorry, not sorry.
Renee asked, "Why are your books centered on books?" Of course, she's thrilled that you do, but
Thank
curious.
you. I feel like for me, like books are such a ubiquitous part of my life as not only an author, but also a reader. I like to say that I've always been a reader, but it's funny because my mom apparently said they used to have to pay me like a penny a page to read when I was a kid, but I don't remember, so it doesn't count. Um, so it's always
Love
been
that.
something that I've always like, I'm thinking about a book that I've read or that I want to read, or I'm seeing something that reminds me of something that I read in a book. And so maybe it's a little bit indulgent, but I do love to write about characters who are readers or have some sort of aspect of books in their life. And I especially love to write about bookstores and libraries because I feel like the community that you guys foster with that is such a beautiful thing. And readers are some of the most empathetic and intelligent people. And really, what better kind of community to foster than people who are like-minded in that regard? So, like with Warwick's and all the other bookshops out there, like you guys are really just amazing. And even building this online community like you guys have been able to do, and like you said, having it in the family for 4 generations is really just amazing. So just I'm applauding
Oh.
you guys because you guys are awesome.
And
And I love to
it's
write about that.
it's universal. I mean, one of the things that, in my books, oh, that sounded so braggy. But anyway, we all
Oh,
have different things we infuse. And I know when my readers read one of my books, they can easily access the classical symphonies or pieces or the Baroque operas that I reference. They can go to YouTube. With your books, when you mention a book, readers have access to go, and it adds an extra level to the interaction with the character because books are such a universal experience and language, and music is such a universal experience and language. And perhaps then we can narrow the gap between World War II Poland or Nottingham and
right.
contemporary era Florida, where you are. And I think that that is one of the reasons authors try to find things that are recognizable when we can. And Madeline's books came out at a time when we were all reading a lot more and books were selling a lot more because you really ramped up during the pandemic. And so that experience of being isolated, but finding community through books, our pals at Friends and Fiction, we're both close friends with the ladies who run that. And that started out of this need for people to connect
Right.
through that.
Through books. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's something that, because writing World War II, it can be depressing. And so my job has always like my goal rather with all of these books has been not to just give these horrific atrocities and gratuitous splendor, because I don't really want to do that. I still talk about them because it would do a disservice to the people who lived through it not to. But for me, what I really want to highlight is the bravery of the people the way that the people band together with community, and going back to it, like it really does oftentimes center around books, and also even just the importance of books. And the importance of books has come through so many times in firsthand accounts that I've done in my research, that's, you know, another reason kind of why it factors in as well. So yeah. Mhm.
I think that answers Susan's question. She had put a question in the chat about why you decided on focusing on World War II. Krista's wondering what made you want to write?
Oh gosh. So, you know, it's funny. I've always kind of like written, like even when I was little and I hadn't actually learned how to write yet. I remember we had to draw a picture of us going swimming, and I actually made a cartoon of me like getting ready to go to the pool and going swimming and diving in. And so when my mom, you know, we moved back and forth constantly, and my mom had all of these boxes, and she kept every accolade, you know, that I ever achieved. And it's like 100 on a spelling test in second grade. Like she moved this around back and forth to and from Germany. And so when I was like 25 or something, she gifted me like, you know, 5 or 6 of these boxes. I'm like, oh, thanks, Mom. So there's like a shoe box left. Don't tell her I said that. But but as I was going through this, I found all of these chapters that I had started and these outlines for books that I had started. And I even had a hardcover book that I made myself with material covering chunks of cardboard. And it was a story about mermaids who, I guess, these little girls were on an airplane and it crashed on an island and they became mermaids. And I wrote it when I was 9. I illustrated it myself. Um, so I think that with writing, it's something that I've always kind of wanted to do. And I actively really started when I was on maternity leave with my first daughter. And I was reading Diana Gabaldon's Outlander. And
Oh,
I loved that, like the brawny Scotsman and the feisty Sassenach, you know, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. I really want to write a story about these, like about characters that are similar to this. And so that's what kind of got me into writing historical romance in the first place. And then, like I said, after historical romance, then I kind of started thinking, okay, well, what if I like, do I have the chops to do historical fiction and to do all of that research? And then, you know, like I said, I discovered that I am like the classic ultimate nerd where it's not just history, like I am a research girl in my heart. So, how about you, Rachel? How did you start off with?
yeah. I've always been a voracious reader of like everything since I was a little kid, and I would write stories for myself. And I'm always working on a book that I never intend to have published, so that I can always remember that the writing has to happen for me first. So I
Yeah,
never lose the enjoyment because the business aspect is so huge. And I will say, somebody asked about World War II. Part of the reason I started writing World War II is that's what publishers wanted, and it was a saleable era. And I thought, if I do post-war, which I did with London Restoration and Mozart Code, and have those stories. But while I'm writing World War II, and I believe Madeline's the same, we are very aware and cognizant of what voices from World War II we feel are appropriate for us to tell. I will not tackle some stories in World War II because I am not the best voice for that. I feel that I have to be, true to my characters, but also leave some of the stories from this very broad, very expansive world to voices that are better representative of the different cultures and aspects and experiences of the war. So I think that we're both the same in that it's, you know, we recognize and we read all manner, but where is it appropriate for us to explore our stories and
right.
it, books and music and yeah.
Well, and there's so many stories that haven't been revealed yet from World War II.
Ah,
I feel like it's really interesting, you know, not to go into the sort of male-female dynamic aspect of all of that, but it's so funny because, like, especially in France, for example, like men were so easy to talk about, like, oh, this is what I did during the war. And, you know, women, it's so common reading through a lot of these firsthand accounts where women were like, you know, I woke up, I had breakfast for my kids, I took them to school. I dropped off some explosives. I went over and ran
yeah.
some secret messages to this location. I came home, got the kids from school, and made dinner. And then I went to bed. It's just a day. You know, and it really was sort of this nonchalance of like, I just did what I did. This is what I do. And so I think that kind of having, especially with women, getting to tell these stories all these years later and really have these women finally have the amazing feats that they were able to accomplish in such difficult times while still managing things at home and making sure they had food on the table when there was no food to be had. I mean, it's amazing. And so it is such an honor to have had the opportunity to tell as many of these stories as we have. Yeah. Mhm.
I think we should probably wrap up, but something we like to ask, I'm sure you've both gotten this from Julie, is what are you reading right now?
Oh, that is a very good question. So, I actually am, I'm looking at my Audible right now just to make sure that I got the name correct. But I am doing my MFA program in creative writing.
Oh, great.
And so
Someone who
Allison,
doesn't need an MFA is getting an MFA. I remember.
I actually,
I'm
to be
already made
honest with
fun
you,
of you for this.
I have my online Zoom class tonight at 8 p.m. So
Oh my gosh.
but so for one of my classes, Allison Richmond is going to be one of the professors. And I'm super looking forward to it. And so for my class, we had to read The Lost Wife, which I have not yet read. It's a World War II as well. And I mean, it was just exquisitely written and just so absolutely well done. Very, very, very like tugs the heartstrings, and very well researched as well. Just again, really seated in that human experience that happened during the war. So, how about you, Rachel?
I just got in the mail today the new Linda Loigman book, The Love
Oh,
Elixir of Augusta Stern. I've interviewed her for Warwick's before, but I was very excited to get a copy of that. In my job right now as a literary agent in my day job, I actually can't talk about a lot of the books that I'm reading because they're not out yet for clients and such. But I can tell you that there's a lot of really good ones. And I will say that the other night I had trouble sleeping, so I went and got that book talk, that sensation. What is it? The Pumpkin Spice Cafe.
oh yeah.
By Laurie Gilmore, which is the author's pseudonym, but obviously it is basically just the Gilmore Girls. And it was a lovely, like, it's 3 a.m. I can't sleep. I'm just going to read this book. So
Oh, I
next
love
time I'm
that.
on here in a few weeks with Yvette Corporon, we're going to be talking about actually World War II, Madeline, but this one is set in Greece. So
Oh,
very exciting, Daughters of
yeah.
Ruin. I'll have better recommendations then.
Well, and Amanda, what are you reading?
Yeah.
Oh goodness. No, let's not.
All right, which
I
10
also
books are you reading?
I also just realized, did you say your class is at 8? 'Cause is that in like 3 minutes?
It's in 4 minutes. It's on
Oh
Zoom
my
also. I'll
gosh.
just end
Okay.
one Zoom and go to the other. Like I
I
got
enjoy that Madeline
this.
is like, she is succinct. She's like, okay, we're on this now, and we're on this now.
I'm
Quick, tell us
telling
how.
you, my life is very carefully balanced with a planner that would probably give a lot of people a heart attack, but it works. I somehow make it work.
I love it. We should let her go.
Yes, just if you want to tell us how we can best follow you online on the socials,
Oh,
and
thank you.
yeah, please.
Yeah. So really the best place is just my website is madelinemartin.com because it does have all of my social media handles on there, my newsletter subscriber as well. I also really love to meet with book clubs. I do Zoom chats probably 3 to 4 times a week. So there's a place on there where you can see a reader's guide, but you can also request that I join your book club, and you can pick my brain about anything that I write. Otherwise, I'm at Madeline M. Martin on social media accounts because Madeline Martin was sadly already taken. Boo. And how about you, Rachel?
I am Rach K. Mick, RACHKMC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, X. And on Twitter, X, I I mostly talk about the writing and publishing world because of, my agent stuff. So if you're interested in how to write, and I'm always giving tips and tricks. But I also always focus on what I'm reading, cover reveals. Madeline and I love talking about our friends who have new stuff coming out. So
Yes,
give me a follow and I can find you recommendations too.
all the books.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much.
Thanks
Great,
so
Thank
great
much.
you.
conversation. Thanks everyone for being here. And the replay will be on YouTube very shortly if you want to watch again and share with your fellow book lovers.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
Bye,
you.
Thank you, Sarah and
Madeline.
Rachel.
Bye,
And
Have
thank
fun in
you
everybody.
so much,
class.
Nice
Nice
to
everyone, for
see
to
you.
joining us
have
tonight.
fun in school.
I think I have 2 minutes. I got this.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.